Hey, I want to welcome you to part one of our series, This Is Your Place. I'm Bob Pittenger, and I'll be your host. This week we're looking at Ezekiel's vision from chapter 47. It's where he sees a small trickle of water come out from underneath the door of the temple. The water gets deeper and wider the further it moves out from the temple. And before long, the trickle of water becomes a rushing river too big to cross, to walk through. What a beautiful picture of how we see God working in the New Testament. You see, originally Jesus came and discipled around 100 people, not really enough to make a difference. However, after his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, that number grew exponentially. Within 20 years, people were talking about Christians in the church as those who were turning the world upside down. And now, almost 2,000 years since Jesus' ascension to heaven, there are over 2 billion people who call themselves Christians. That's about a third of the world's population. Truly, what started as a trickle has become a rushing river. And if we are obedient to God's call in our lives, He will turn this rushing river into a tsunami that envelops the entire world. But before that can happen, we need to examine ourselves. Just like the waters getting deeper the further Ezekiel moved away from the temple, so the further we move away from our natural desires, and the more we move away from our natural desires, the more we're carried away by the currents of God's will. And those currents will lead us to the specific place God has designed for you and me. We see the same thing throughout the Bible. The Israelites had to leave Egypt to arrive at the mountain of God. They had to go there to receive His laws and get marching orders to move into the promised land. Because of the persecution, the first New Testament church was forced out of its comfort zone in Jerusalem and into Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. In the same way, the church at Antioch was being moved by the deep waters of God. They were experiencing a great movement of God when they decided to obey God and sent out 2 of their greatest leaders in Paul and Barnabas. Now, the church was growing exponentially, and it would have been easy for them to say, hey, let's just focus on our local family. We're successful. We're doing this. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. However, God planned to use Paul and Barnabas to continue pushing the deep waters of salvation out to many other people throughout the known world. Once again, what began as a small trickle eventually became deep waters. However, to experience these deep waters, we must move. We can't stay where we are. We have to move. When God leads us, we must leave what is holding us captive. We get outside of our comfort zone, and sometimes we must leave where God is working to start that work with others. Did you hear that? Sometimes we have to move from where God is working. He's doing something great, just like He did with Paul and Barnabas. Move from where He's doing something great, and He will move us someplace else to reach others who have not experienced that as of yet. So, how do we dive into these deep waters? How do we give of ourselves so that these waters carry us to those who are in need? How do we begin to recognize when God is rearranging the landscape of our lives? I think those are all great questions. I think the first thing is we must intimately know God. We have to intimately know Him if we're going to recognize when He is moving. And this only happens as we spend time with Him, which is what we call prayer. However, prayer should always be a two-way conversation. When a couple gets married, they expect their conversations and discussions to include both people. It's not like you get married and you just go off talking and never listen to your partner. You listen to them. You speak, they reply, you reply. You ask something of them, and then they do what you're asking. They ask something, and you do. It's a two-way conversation. Well, it's the same way when we talk or pray with God. We talk, He listens, He responds. He talks, we listen, and then obey. If our prayers are more like speeches, where we expect God to listen and react, we will never end up in a close, intimate relationship with Him. Our prayers cannot be a speech to where we just stand up and we just say, hey, God, here's my long Christmas list of all the things I want from you and expect from you. And that's what I want. And then we turn and walk away. An intimate relationship is built on two people who talk and listen to one another. It's a two-way conversation. Next, we need to ensure that we are spiritually healthy. Unhealthy people will never work up the faith to step out into the deep waters. Spiritually healthy people have the strength and the confidence, the passion and trust to go obediently wherever God is leading. While spiritually unhealthy people struggle, not only they struggle, but they struggle to get past their needs to see or hear what God's plan is. So we need to examine ourselves to ensure how healthy we are spiritually. The third thing we need to do is, and this is the big one for me, let me just be honest with you, we must overcome our fears. Fear of being in over our head, not having control, not knowing how things are going to turn out. And the big one, and this is it for me, is the fear of failure or success. All of these will keep you out of the rushing waters of God's great plan for your life. You see, Satan wants to magnify your fears. In reality, most of our fears are the size of a toothpick, but Satan wants us to look at those fears and see them as big as a giant redwood tree. Overcoming our fears begins by entrusting our lives, our families, our possessions, goals, and dreams into the hands of God. It's giving everything to Him and saying, I trust you with these things. Once we do this, we will recognize when God is moving and we'll be ready to jump in with Him. In fact, we'll long to be a part of what He's doing. We'll long to be a part of the challenge, the excitement, and even see the fear as something that needs to be overcome and not something that needs to be run from. We'll have a desire to not only be used by God, but to bring others along with us. We'll begin to see how our passions, life skills, and even our past are spiritually energized to be used by and for God. We will become people riding the waves of God's rushing river and play our part in turning the world upside down. During your discussion time, I'd like to ask you to talk about what may be holding you back from being a part of God's plan to use you to help others.